Welcome back to Grade 7 History, Unit Number 1, New France and British North America, 1713 to 1800. This is Lesson Number 2, How did the land change after the Treaty of Utrecht? And we will be learning all about the Treaty of Utrecht and what it meant for New France and North America. This is a pretty famous painting here on this title slide. You'll see it at least a couple of more times in your textbook. Just the author's rendition of political leaders from various countries that were involved in the conflict, which was ended with the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht. Just points out that treaty signing ceremonies were big occasions unto themselves. Certainly, they were meant for the elites to enjoy, not just bringing conflict to a close, but also representatives were expected to wear their finest for such an event. A lot of pomp and circumstance to go with the signing of all the paperwork. But before we begin today's lesson, let's consider the following. Can you think of any times when the borders of a country or countries have changed? You might want to put the video on pause, jot down a couple of ideas because we'll talk about this at the start of our next class. Borders within countries and between countries do not always stay the same. As we will learn in today's lesson, as well as upcoming lessons, the borders in North America changed a lot during the 1700s. And we saw a very similar map in our previous video. The color's a little bit different here. Here we can see that the French held lands in North America are colored in blue. As you can see, New France included more than just Quebec. New France included a large chunk of what is now the United States. Okay, in red we've got English, British-controlled land. Okay, and then the purple here, we'll be talking about this more. We're actually looking at lands that did belong to the French, but were actually handed over to Great Britain in 1713. We'll look at why those lands were handed over. In 1700, the King of Spain died, and he did not have a child to pass his kingdom to. France, which is always looking to take new land and possessions, decided that it would try to take control of Spain and its colonies by presenting someone it chose to be the new king. This started the War of the Spanish Succession, and here's one of many paintings showing the author or the artist's rendition of one conflict that was part of the War of the Spanish Succession. That's a beautiful thing about history and painting. So much of world history has actually been captured by artists who were living in different time periods. One thing we will be talking about over the course of grade 7, grade 8 history is whether all of the paintings and political cartoons which we'll be looking at are entirely accurate. The United Kingdom of Great Britain, or Britain, was formed in 1707 when England and Scotland united. The British, ruled by Queen Anne, joined with several other European countries to stop France from taking over Spain. The war ended with the Treaty of Utrecht. This treaty not only made France agree to leave Spain alone, it also forced France to give up some of its territories. One of those territories was part of what is now a Canadian province. Today, New Brunswick is the only Canadian province that is officially bilingual. Before it was called New Brunswick, it was a French colony named Acadia. Acadia included parts of what are now Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. The Treaty of Utrecht made the French give Acadia to Britain, meaning that English-speaking people could start moving to the territory. Before the Treaty of Utrecht was signed, the French and the British continued to argue over who owned certain parts of North America. Even after the treaty was signed and new maps were drawn, there were still disputed territories. One of the reasons for the dispute to continue was because neither the French nor the British knew what the ancient boundaries that were referred to in the treaty were. Another reason why some land remained in dispute was because the French and the British did not know exactly what land they were claiming. In 1713, only some of the land past the Great Lakes had been explored, and Europeans were still trying to make maps that were accurate. As explorers discovered more land past 1713, this created more disputes over new land. The Treaty of Utrecht was negotiated and signed by Europeans. The First Nations were not even considered when territory was transferred from one country to another. One section of the treaty, Section 15, stated that the French and the British were to have peace with each other and with the First Nations in North America. Now, when I stop talking, I want you to put the video on pause so that you can try reading through this copy of the original printing of Section 15. And just a question for us to discuss. What makes this text difficult to read? So put the video on pause, read through a paragraph, and we'll talk about why it's hard to read today. After the treaty was signed, the French and the British went back to competing in the fur trade. The British wanted to strengthen their trade relationships with certain First Nations. Many First Nations welcomed stronger relations with the British as they felt that it was beneficial to their people as well. Sadly, as Europeans settled the east coast of North America, they forced many First Nations to leave their homes. Europeans killed First Nations peoples or sold them into slavery. Now that Britain had entire control of the East Coast, British settlers chased away or killed entire First Nations in order to take their land. Some First Nations, like the Abenaki, relocated to New France where they were welcomed by the French in hopes that they would help defend New France from future British attacks. The governor of New France, Vaudreuil, gave out huge payments to the Wabanaki Confederacy to ensure that they would be loyal to New France. Alright, time to wrap up today's lesson with 3 discussion questions, which you will be writing your responses to on a piece of paper. But first, let me read them out. Number 1. How do you think the First Nations felt about the land they lived on being exchanged from one European country to another? 2. Why do you think the First Nations did not demand to be involved in the negotiations and the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht? And 3. How could competition between the French and the British in the fur trade actually benefit the First Nations? So again, you're going to need to write down your responses on a piece of paper with pen or pencil. So you will need to put the video on pause in order to have enough time to reread the questions and then write your responses. If you don't feel ready to answer any of these 3 questions, it means you need to go back and watch this video at least 2 more times. And then when you're ready, put the video on pause and write down your responses to these 3 questions. Put the video on pause now. All right, and I look forward to our discussion at the start of our next class. But for now, this concludes today's video.